Welcome to BEARTH Podcast. I'm Ash. Today I want to introduce you to Melanie Curtis and the journey that she's been on in her life. Melanie has a background in skydiving, and now she does incredible life coaching and helps a lot of people in their endeavors. But I want to have a different kind of conversation. Since the start of COVID-19, I have definitely noticed that women in particular are posting their pictures of wine get-togethers and Zoom hangouts and pouring a glass. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy a glass of wine or a social event where we can share drinks. It loosens us up and gives us the room to talk. But I started to wonder, what is our relationship as women with alcohol? What is society's permission around alcohol? And how are we engaging with it in a time of stress? How are we engaging with it in a time when our anxiety is up, when things seem more tense? COVID-19 has put a lot of people back in their homes. It's tightened the reins. There's a little less community support when it comes to their day-to-day life. Is our relationship to alcohol such that it's the first vice we go for when things tighten up? I'm not necessarily saying that it's bad, it's not. But I want to talk with Melanie because she made the decision 3 years ago to set aside alcohol and look at her own relationship with it and decide that she needed to do something differently. Let's listen in. It's a bit revolutionary as a white woman in America to just be like, I'm going to just see what it's like to not drink.
You know, it starts with the micro for me and expanded into the macro, where basically I had gone through a painful divorce and a painful breaking down of my own identity. I had a real multiple year period of pain and healing and just struggle, emotional struggle. The first relationship that I was in, the first love relationship that I was in post divorce and sort of life breakdown and everything, was triggering for me, of course, as it would be for any person who, you know, has this sort of open or healing, not quite healed wound. And so as a result, I was feeling insecure and nervous. And the person that I was with, he didn't drink. And I just wanted to. So it wasn't because he didn't drink, but it was basically because I want to do everything I can to be emotionally strong and stable for this new relationship that I'm in, to help us and help me get through that, which it totally worked. And we got through that and it was great. It was all good. And so then I honestly just continued because I really liked it. And as I brought consciousness to my decision and my experiment, as it were, so it was sort of a social experiment on myself, I started to think about and notice that people that I looked up to or admired in the realm of personal development and impact, that so many of them also didn't drink. And so I started to go, maybe this not drinking thing that I've been experimenting with for whatever handful number of months is one of the keys to me leveling up my own work and my own social impact, my own creativity, my own connecting, my own healing. I really had this sort of insight and curiosity about how my continuing to abstain from alcohol would impact all of those things. And so I continued the social experiment. At some point, though, I started to experiment saying to people that, like, really owning that I don't drink anymore, because that felt very true for me. Whereas before it was like, I'm in a social experiment with myself. I'm seeing, maybe I'll drink again, maybe I won't, because I'm not an alcoholic. I have no problem stopping, or I've never had an issue with alcohol. So this really was a very conscious choice for me on where I wanted my life to go and wanting to have an experience that I had never had.
Let me ask you a question. Before you decided to do this, before this decision was made, maybe before this particular relationship, or maybe even in the midst of it, even though you didn't have necessarily addiction issues or anything like that to it, what would you say your relationship with it was? Like, what was
Yeah,
alcohol to you?
great question. Yeah, I mean, I would say, like most people, inside of a societal construct around it, and used it as a social salve, used it to bring down any social anxiety I might feel in certain settings, stuff like that, and use it as a way to participate like in social experiences with other people. That was one of the things that I sort of had to learn and dismantle in myself when I stopped drinking, was this feeling that I was somehow missing out on experiences, that somehow alcohol and being under the influence of it somehow facilitated life experiences and connections that I would no longer have available to me. I really challenge that because and why I say that is, not only is it not true in my experience, it actually, I mean, historically would only really overall make me feel kind of bad, but it's just hard to describe. But like what I want to go to is the concept of numbing and
Mm.
not having the skills to be at ease in a social situation, not having the skills and understanding of self and strength in self and peace in self to be able to feel at ease and free and fun and radiant without that influence. So that skill set I clearly did not fully have. And so when I decided to stop drinking for like fucking reals, I really knew and wanted to have the experience of being forced into my feelings, being forced into my anxieties, being forced into the experience of you can't use that. You have to figure out other things to get through those feelings and experiences and resistances.
And so I can assume then that in the beginning stages of this exploration, that was actually really hard to come to in order to be able to learn those skills, to come to those skills, to have that understanding of yourself. Were there instances for which you had a moment where you're like, Jesus, this would be just so much easier if I had a glass of wine in my hand?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. There were definitely moments like that when the prolonged, I mean, it depends on the emotion, but say loneliness, say loneliness, like totally understandable experience, totally common experience, definitely an experience I had recurring as you heal from all of the things that we go through in this life, all kinds of different separations and breakups and heartbreaks, and whether it's in the love relationship realm or otherwise. But even just insecurity in your work or your business or where you're going entrepreneurially, and because I'm an entrepreneur, it could be something like that, where you're just stressing out, you're just worried. Those types of things can be taking that edge off. And so that edge is the thing that I wanted to really get get comfortable with. That edge is the thing where I'm like, that I'm avoiding that. That 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 prolonged discomfort is what I'm avoiding. So that's what
Hmm.
I need to do.
And so then the relationship with the alcohol really is about relationship with self. And so then the alcohol is a tool or whatever. And what's interesting here is that you sort of made this conscious decision, but it took you into some unconscious places that you hadn't quite addressed or thought through entirely prior to that decision.
100%. Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm over here Yeah, perfectly without, salves and numbing agents, as it were. I watch the occasional Netflix movie, and I eat frozen pizza sometimes when it's a global pandemic, but you know what I mean?
I think
I
we
feel,
all have vices, but I also
yeah,
think that, and alcohol is interesting to me because, so I had, a couple of drinks the other night, but it was the first time in, I don't know, 2, 3 months, maybe 2.5 months that I had, and I did so, with a friend, and I paired it with food. And so I think for me, something like that has now, my relationship with it now is drastically different than it was when I was in my early 20s, which,
yeah,
I went through a divorce and I drank a lot, and then I worked in the bars and I was in the bar culture, so I drank even more. And then I got a professional job, and so it lessened a little, but there was still quite a bit. Being a journalist, a lot of journalists are known to be very strong drinkers. And then in Mosul, it changed again because I didn't want to go out on the front line hungover. From my relationship with it had to continually change. And now I'll go weeks or months without it. And I don't need it. And I also have a check in my system that when I drink, I need to go drink like another half liter of water or something afterwards. Like
nice.
there's an element of understanding my physical body and how my physical body is going to react,
Yeah.
that I need to then address after it's done, or with it, or along with it. And so I think what's interesting to me here is the relationship with alcohol is one we don't think about because it's legal. Again, not a judgment, but I keep raising my eyebrow going, this is interesting.
I think it's super important to highlight the non-judgment,
Yeah, absolutely.
because everyone's scenarios and everyone's beliefs and needs and life situations are all different. And I have zero judgment truly on people who drink or do not drink. But my point is that I really feel like it's important that everybody feel supported in their
Yeah,
own
absolutely.
journey with this relationship. Because if I think back on my young years as a young woman, and I think about college and the drinking culture of college. That experience moved on with the, social, even in skydiving, a very common thing is you'll have a cold one at the end of the day. Well, a lot of people will stand around the campfire and will drink beers. It's a
Absolutely.
very common social setting. And when we take it forward to stress scenarios, right? So if we're talking about the global pandemic and we're talking about meme culture and how ha 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 I need a drink, or ha 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 this is how I'm drinking wine, or whatever. Again, I'm not really describing memes very well. This, it's, to me, feels like it's an emotional salve for, I think, most, whether it is wanting to be included or a part of an experience, whether it's I want to ease my social anxiety around a campfire, whether it's I don't want to be the only person who's like, I don't want to scull a beer. So you do that. Or it's I'm really stressed out. And I don't know how to deal with that. So this is how I deal with that. So whether
I
it
completely agree
is,
with you. I completely agree with you. And there have been times I've stood in front of the liquor store and thought, do I want to pick up a bottle of whatever, like name the thing in my head? Now, I also have to admit and be very forthright about the fact that there is addiction in my family. And so I'm very cognizant of that. And I think that over the years that has contributed to my shifting relationship with it. And I was watching the Red Table Talk with
yep,
Jada Pinkett Smith, and then they did one on addiction. And there was a woman who gets up on a video and she asks the doctor and the group that her and her friends were having earlier drinking sessions and if that was okay. And the doctor immediately says to her, he said, if you're asking, evaluate that. And so, and then of course, Adrian and Jada both sort of jump in with this. And then Willow talked about giving up weed. Like, weed is, probably safer than alcohol on many levels I enjoy a joint when it's available to me. But Willow was realizing that there was something in it for her that was like an oral fixation that she needed to address. So to me, and I think we could apply this probably to food or any other kind of
Sure, absolutely.
thing. But what I have
Hmm.
found with alcohol is that it just seems to have an interesting conversation around alcohol and women that I find very distinctive
Hmm.
to other social situations or to men, that I find very different. And I don't know if that's an experience you've observed, but or you were even part of it anyway. But to me, it was interesting to hear your story as a woman in America who's an entrepreneur, who does a lot of things, who wears a lot of hats,
Hmm.
say, I'm not doing this. This isn't me anymore.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you're pointing to that is important to point to is the consciousness of it. Because I think in my experience, it seems to me that when consciousness is brought to any version of consumption, it's okay. When it is unconscious and driven by whatever, when there's consciousness brought to it, then yeah, why not? Of course, you can have a glass of wine with dinner and pair it with delicious food and enjoy it and all of that. When it is unconscious, as in we really aren't seeing that we can choose out of it if we want to, and again, there was a long time where I didn't even contemplate that I might want that. It was never even a conscious idea that I could want to choose out of drinking alcohol. I was so in the, sea of the societal consciousness that we all are born into, at least here in the States.
I think what stemmed my thinking around it and observing it and kind of going and reading through a few things was that conversation on Red Table Talk. And just sort of this social aspect of it that I see. It's almost like this soft addiction for women in a way, because it's like they're out from the kids, the job, the house, make the list go. And there's laughter around it. If you go back to episodes of Will and Grace, which was one of my favorite, it still is one of my favorite sitcoms, right? It's hilarious that Karen is a drunk.
Right,
She's a complete addict, and yet we
right.
laugh at it. We think it's
Yeah.
funny. Now imagine if that were one of the male characters. Would it be as funny, or would it take a different tone? On the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, they talk about the long-term health risks for women can be greater than they would be necessarily for men, because often women may drink the same amount, but their bodies do not process the same amount quickly. So they list things like liver damage, heart disease, and brain damage. They say long-term alcohol misuse is a leading cause of heart disease, and women are more susceptible to alcohol-related heart disease than men, even though they may consume less alcohol even in their lifetime. So what's interesting to me is that there is a greater effect on women. Now, I'm also under this impression a bit that, I think that in a way it's almost, again, because it's legal, because it's easy access, because there's almost a social acceptance for it. This is about the relationship with something that seems to be more acceptable for women and yet harms women maybe on a deeper level.
If I think about, and that's again, I go to that micro story because I believe that is present, whether it is forces from the patriarchy, right? Of we're in this societal experience of women have to do everything in the home and all the big conversation around gender roles and this and that, and how much more stress is almost very likely on women in families. If we as women were already under higher levels of stress and we were supported, quote unquote, by a societal acceptance of what is healthy and okay, then it makes sense that the rise of that usage would be happening. Because again, if you aren't aware or thinking, there's something else I could do, right?
Right.
There's something else I could do. And again, I'm not trying to like pimp the pros, but it really does help to have a support system of some kind. So it doesn't have to be a professional, it can be a sibling or a friend or an online Facebook group that's connected to positive thoughts or sobriety or whatever. And then you're having versions of community that are helping you change that mindset about that as the only path to sort of taking the edge off. I kind of keep using that phrase because I feel like that's such an easy in and so low pressure. And so it's this, do you know what I mean? Like
It's the
there's
perfect phrase. It's the perfect. You're saying exactly what this is, and it's about taking the edge off. And when we think of that phrase in general, we actually do go to drinking because that's what we say it is. It's taking the
totally.
edge off. Now, you know, again, I think this is a great conversation because I am someone who still drinks once in a while and you're someone who doesn't. And I think that this actually brings us back to the conversation we were having earlier about consciousness and relationship to that. And
Yes.
so then I think we have to move into a little bit of this, and you could base this on your story or base this on the people that you coach, but what then can we offer women in particular to move through these phases? Esther Perel talks about, don't just say stress, unpack what that is, right? Unpack the
Yes.
emotions. So these difficult emotions, which you've had to do because, setting aside alcohol pushed you through some difficult things. Again, that doesn't mean that alcohol you have to give it all up. Some people do, some people don't, but it's a matter of if we can shift the conversation about relationship and consciousness around it. What can we add to help women have these conversations, to have these spaces, so that maybe it's not the immediate thought of, I'm feeling bad, I'm going to go grab a drink.
I think one of the most major other avenues is connection. So,
Mm.
how can we find avenues for healthy connection, authentic, deep, real connection? And so, this is the thing, like when we're thinking about taking the edge off or I just need a break, that simply shows us that we don't have other skills. So, no problem. That's a gap that we can lean into in whatever way we feel like it. You don't have to become some meditative master. You can. That's one thing you can do. You don't have to hire a pro. That's one thing you can do. You know what I mean? But again, this walking through the fire, for me, it started with a stake in the ground. And I'm a very intense person. I like extreme experiences. It's not just because I'm a skydiver. I've been that way. The things that I do, I like to really do. And so that's why I think I'm individually, personally called to, I don't drink anymore. Like, that's why I think I'm so all the fuck in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I
And
love that.
so I don't necessarily think that's right for everyone, but to go back to the at taking the edge off, in my experience with drinking for that purpose, is that I used to think, and I think a lot of people probably have this same idea, is that we think it's going to help us. We think it's really going to help us take that edge off. We're going to have a little bit of a break from sort of the stress, quote unquote, whatever we're feeling. But when the truth is that it actually really doesn't help us. It only interrupts the thing that we actually need to address for a very short term, and then only puts us usually in an even worse place emotionally and mentally to deal with that thing we actually need to deal with. And so this is my calling people to the carpet to go, if you're avoiding walking through that fire and you are doing it because you don't know how to do it, that's where I call people to other things that they have historically been unwilling to look at. And so that's why I bring up professional help. That's why I bring up joining a group you've never thought to join. That's why I bring up calling someone you love and trust, who you know loves you and has your back, and having a real fucking conversation with them. Like, real connection is the antidote for this feeling of disconnection, which can very much magnify our feeling of this need to take that edge off.
What is the thing that maybe you're the most proudest that you've overcome from sort of an emotional connectedness standpoint because of this particular action you made the decision to take?
Accessing a personal ease and security inside myself, like healing deep insecurity. For me, healing that loneliness that I talked about, being able to be with myself and not fear disconnection, not fear being alone. That's a big thing that if I didn't make myself experience that fully, aka didn't numb it with alcohol, I wouldn't really have had the pain. I wouldn't have been able to visit the pain. And I needed to in order to be able to transform it.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope that stirred some new ideas for you, some new thoughts to take into your communities and your own conversations. I'll put all of Melanie Curtis's information in the show notes. You can follow her, you can check out her work, and see more of what she's about. For now, may you live and move and have your being. Cheers.